some time off, we are back with fresh topics and new speakers. And I'm thrilled to be your host today for How to Become a Great CTO Meetup series. Just a reminder, you can tune into our episodes every second Tuesday on YouTube. However, we also have
recording in progress
Meetup every last Tuesday of the month. We host a live gathering at Unicheck in Kyiv. So please follow us and register for our upcoming events. Why are we doing this? We aim to build a community of inspiring CTOs. This platform is a space for you to present your challenges, seek for advice. And moreover, we would like to grow collectively and bring successful products to life. For those who might be new here, my name is Iana Mykhailenko. I'm a director of engineering at Turnitin. And joining me today is our exceptional individual, my former boss. He is seasoned CPO and CTO with a decade of different experience in leadership roles in industry-leading firms such as CoPart, IBM, Goldman Sachs, Turnitin, and so on. We will talk today about due diligence on acquiring and being acquired. He has an actual experience being on both sides of things. Allow me to introduce today's distinguished guest, my former boss, Bob Lee. Hey,
Thank
Bob.
You. Hi, Iana.
So nice to hear you.
Yeah, great to be here. Good catching up with you again. And welcome, everybody.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. It's, I live in California in the Bay Area, and this is actually the best time of the year weather-wise for us. So this is prime seasons, and I'm enjoying it.
I know that you are Apple fan, actually, and it seems like you're going to miss an Apple event today. Thank you.
Yeah, I consider myself to be a huge Apple fanboy, and I likely will upgrade to whatever the iPhone 15 ends up being. And yes, in 1 hour, the Apple event starts streaming live, but I'm pretty sure you can go in and start at the beginning whenever. You can do it in near real time, so no worries at all.
Right, so we're going to compete for your attention today and for attention of our audience as well. So I know that a lot of Turnitin people actually sign up for event today. So hi to all Turnitin folks and ex-Turnitin folks as well. But for those people who don't know you, could you please share a little bit of your background, who you are, and which kind of experience do you have?
Sure. So I've been in technology my entire career, which has spanned several decades now. I started out just like many of you as a software engineer. Did that for maybe about 5 years or so, and then decided to try doing something a little different and being a manager, and entering, I guess, the leadership part of my career. And so I became a first level manager, and then progressively moved up the ranks a bit. As I think back to those times, one of the things that you kind of struggle with as a first level manager, in addition to just not knowing anything about managing, is struggling with the balance between managerial responsibilities and technical responsibilities. Because typically, I think what happens is like you're the subject matter expert as a technical person, and then you become a manager, and you still want to hold on to that SME unofficial title, I guess. And so one of the challenges I think about back then is sort of letting go of that, so that you have to build trust amongst your team that they could be even smarter than you are technically, and just focus on kind of the leadership aspects and building the team and helping the organization grow and getting products out the door, et cetera. I spent quite a number of years at a company that I still reflect fondly back on, which is Charles Schwab. And for those of you who don't know Schwab, in the US, it's the largest discount brokerage firm here, and it's been the largest for a while. But We were real pioneers in online trading, which, people take for granted today, but in the mid 90s, being able to use this thing called the World Wide Web to place trades was a brand new thing. And so I was involved quite intimately with that. And then after Y2K is when I started embarking more in my startup career. And so I joined a couple of startups, an enterprise software startup that ultimately got acquired by IBM, and also an online investment bank that my previous employer, Schwab, helped kickstart, and that got purchased by Goldman Sachs. So yeah, I've been acquired a couple of times, and then I've done a few miscellaneous startups in between. And then more recently, over the past 5-6 years, I was at Turnitin, where I worked with Iana, along with quite a number of other very talented individuals who are still my friends today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing the story. So I would like to actually divide our conversation today to two parts. The first one is how to acquire, and the second one, how does it feel to be acquired? Mm-hmm. So let's chat more about an acquisition experience that you had. So I believe that you played a key leadership role in the companies, like VP of engineering, probably interim CTO, and you helped your company to decide that this startup or this company needs to be acquired. So could you please elaborate more on your experience?
Yeah, and the strategy and approach was really different for each of them. So there's no single formula for success, I guess. So probably a good example is the enterprise software startup I worked at. We were a company that, if you're familiar with observability products like New Relic, we were kind of like a 20-year-old version of that. And this is all pre-cloud. And so we focused on what we called Java application management at the time. And so it was, relatively new technology and pretty compelling, but it was mainly targeted to larger enterprises. And so, and those of you who worked in enterprise software can, relate to this. When you're trying to sell to larger enterprises, really you have a hard time breaking through the barrier of getting the right audience there, because they're usually talking to just their very large vendors that they have relationships with, and not some, little startup that they don't know anything about. And so one of the things that we did to kind of alleviate that early on is we built a relationship with IBM first as a reseller of our product. And so we were focused on that, and that was mildly successful. But then we went the next step, and then we worked out a deal where they OEM'd our product. And so they sold it. So we had to white label it for them, and it had to meet some of their standards, et cetera, et cetera. And then that became, more of a hit, and we got a lot more traction. And then, because of that IBM relationship that we had over a couple of years, it made it less of a hurdle at the end of the day to ultimately get acquired by them. So that was kind of a deliberate strategy we made when we realized that, hey, the only way that we can get into these large companies is to partner up with somebody pretty big that they're already dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Right. So generally, why businesses tend to buy other businesses? So I've heard from you, like building a product for a big business that might acquire you. What else?
Yeah, so I think there are various reasons why companies buy other companies. Sometimes it's just, I have to admit, I think some companies do it for optics so that they can show higher revenue. Another typical reason, I think, is to basically, buy competition so that, the office and company you were affiliated with, or your predecessors were affiliated with, Unicheck, that's a great example of that. Unicheck, so Turnitin, for folks who don't know, is kind of the leaders in plagiarism detection, amongst other things, in the ed tech space. And we had heard about this company called Unicheck that was nipping at our heels, and iterating very quickly at the same time, and did some things that were really innovative. And so that piqued our interest, and resulted ultimately in an acquisition. So I think purchasing competition is pretty common. Another common scenario is to buy a company that does something adjacent to what you're doing to kind of round out your portfolio. And Turnitin certainly did quite a bit of that as well, notably like with Gradescope. So Gradescope is a STEM, is an AI-driven STEM assessment tool that the company bought, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And then Proctor Exam, which is an online proctoring solution, was also one of those where it was just kind of help build out the entire ed tech portfolio for Turnitin.
All right. What about deep tech? So do you have such experience? Oh, sorry, my cat want to ask your questions also.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are you asking, do we buy companies for technology specific reasons?
Yes.
Yeah, sometimes that too. I mean, and we certainly, in the case of Unicheck, we thought when we did the due diligence, we thought they were doing some pretty clever things around search, like Bing search, which about. That could be interesting to us. So that was also a consideration. And as we delved into it, yeah, we could take advantage of that. And I believe Turnitin has taken advantage of that to some degree. So yeah, we do look at that. We certainly look at the people and the founders, especially, pretty closely. Because even though I've not been involved with like an acqui-hire situation, the people still count for a lot, and the founders especially, because they set the tone for the rest of their organization.
All right. So for those who don't know, actually, Unicheck is a Ukrainian startup. It was built in Ukraine. Therefore, Turnitin has an office in Ukraine after the acquisition. I wasn't a part of this acquisition. I just joined after. But anyway, so you are closely involved in Unicheck acquisition, and I've heard a lot of stories from also my employees that I work with right now about this, about that due diligence, about the trip to Ukraine. So could you please describe to our audience the main? So, for example, one business decided to acquire the other. What are the main phases in this due diligence process, and how long does it take usually?
Yeah, again, it varies. I think probably the Unicheck one, you could make the argument that it took a couple of years, because I think, when I first heard that we were even slightly interested in the acquisition, was probably a couple of years before the deal actually closed. So I would say that there's a period of time where there's just sort of casual thinking about, should we, maybe pursue this? But I think when it gets a little more serious, and usually it's the CEO and CFO that are, and whoever, different companies are structured differently. But, in the case of Turnitin, I think a lot was driven by the people who do like business development work as well, who know the ed tech space. I would say that probably started 6 months or before the acquisition was finalized. So, I was involved with technology due diligence, and technology due diligence usually comes probably middle towards the end of the process. I'm guessing that they typically look at, financials and legal and a lot of that stuff a little bit beforehand, before they delve into the technology.
Okay, so let's focus on the technology, actually. For example, I'm a CTO of a startup that is preparing my company for being acquired. Could you please describe what's involved into tech due diligence and how CTO can prepare the companies for this process?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to say process, because I think one of the things that CTOs need to prepare for is to make sure your house is in order, quote unquote. So most startups, and I admit, when I've done startups, I was the same way. I probably wasn't as process oriented or organized as larger companies, but so I think you should probably focus a little bit on, at least giving the appearance of organization and process, and that you have your act together, with security, with all the checks and balances. So because you don't want to give the impression that you're just kind of running amok and it's a free for all. Also, I would say prepare to be asked anything and everything. So I would spend some time thinking about, well, what would, if I was in the other position, what would I be asking, and how should I respond to that? So I think preparation is key. What else? I would say expect to spend some money because you're likely going to be hosting people coming on a visit. You
Mhm.
probably aren't going to host them at your office location because you don't want employees to see them. So you'll do it at an offsite location. If the acquisition continues to go well and they want to do deeper due diligence, you'll probably be asked to do things such as, oh, we want you to do a pen test and show us the results to
Mhm.
make sure you're secure. And almost always they'll ask you to do an open source scan and review. And this stuff costs, I mean, the open source, it's very expensive, relatively
Mhm.
speaking. So just be prepared that if you're in acquisition mode, to spend a little money, set aside some money for these kinds of purposes.
All right, but who pays for that usually?
So it's usually the target, the
Uh-huh.
acquiree that is expected to pay for.
Right. I do believe that it also depends on the phase because I ran the startup before and we were raising investment. So if you are pretty early, an investor can actually pay
Sure,
a check if you are a good negotiator for sure. But usually in the later stages, a target is going to pay for that.
yeah. In the case of Unicheck, I kind of felt bad for the founders because we were staying at a really nice hotel, the Intercontinental, I think, and they were generous enough to just book conference facilities within our hotel for our convenience. And I'm sure that that was not cheap.
Oh, okay, okay. I don't know how much did it cost, but anyway, yeah, it's nice of Unicheck team for sure. So if we actually covered security, pen test, scanning of open source. So what else is expected from artifacts to be present? Actually, like documentation. Should we give
Yeah,
access to GitHub
yeah,
repositories?
documentation, GitHub access usually.
Mhm.
When I do due diligence, I usually ask them to actually go through just sort of a mini development workflow.
Mhm.
Like let's take a look at this component in GitHub. Let's make an update. Let's push it out. So it's just to make sure that they have all the processes in place. Their CI/CD is in
Mhm.
order, et cetera, et cetera. I'll usually want to look at things like how do they do monitoring and show us, how they deal with alerts, et cetera, et cetera.
All
Um,
right.
but yeah, GitHub access is something we I don't know. I can't remember if we actually asked for it at Unicheck, but it is
Mhm.
not uncommon to ask for some repo access as part of the process.
All right. So are there any expectations that everything in tech should be 100% perfect for the deal?
No, no, not 100% perfect, but at least, that there is, processes and controls in place that are within sort of acceptable ranges. I
Mhm.
mean, everyone knows that nobody's perfect, and acquirers know that. Startups in general aren't going to have quite the sort of infrastructure to support, being
Mhm.
nice and tidy all the time. But we also, as I said earlier, you don't want to give the appearance that you're a free for all.
All right, all right. So let's talk about probably deal breakers from technology side. What would you consider as a deal breaker if audit finds that?
um, I think so. Yeah, I would then the answer varies. I would say one reason why, from a tech standpoint, it would be a deal breaker is if their tech stack is so foreign and it would be way too arduous. Say in the case of purchasing a competitor, and we know that the ultimate goal is to integrate their customers into our environment. If we determine that, because of the great discrepancy in tech stack or whatever, that the migration would just be, not worth the effort, I think that could be a deal breaker. There could be some security privacy kinds of things that could potentially be deal breakers, depending on what region in the world you're operating in. And of course, if we don't feel comfortable with, just the general answers were given by the founders, or just don't feel comfortable with them as individuals for whatever reason, that we think they're shady or hiding something, that could be a deal breaker. And just thinking back on the acquisitions I've worked on, especially at Turnitin, I don't think there are any that we flagged as such. Meaning, I don't think there was anything that we actually. Now that I think of it, there was a. I won't even say what. There was a French company that we passed on because they just didn't have their shit together, basically.
All right. So that happens. Okay. So let me ask you this. For example, if some components of the system were outsourced, could it be a potential deal breaker?
It depends. Not necessarily. I mean, I think in this day and age, having some stuff outsourced is not so uncommon. But it depends on what. Like, obviously, if it's their key IP that is largely outsourced to somebody, that would be a red flag. But if it's just, maybe they're outsourcing some level of support, or maybe they're in the process of a migration, and so they've outsourced like their more legacy system, that's not a problem. But outsourcing by itself is not an issue. But if they're outsourcing like key components or their core IP, then that would be a red flag, in my opinion.
What about scalable architecture, for example? If current architecture doesn't scale too much, is it a deal breaker?
I mean, if it was really egregious, maybe. But let me give you an example again at Turnitin. Like, at Turnitin, we have such performance standards. We did so much volume that we pay a lot of attention to performance and scalability. And so, the move towards microservices and being able to scale each service independently, is something that's required. But, that comes with a cost too, in terms of productivity and being able to, do things quickly. And so, if we look at a company and they're just still monolithic, that by itself, I don't think is a deal breaker, because I would have done the same thing at that point in time, because you have no customers, you have to iterate quickly to please whatever customers you're trying to get. And you don't want to necessarily take the time to do all this other infrastructure stuff. So it's a natural evolution. But I think as founders, if you get acquired, if you're in that position, you get acquired by a company, you could expect that you'll be asked at some point to make some changes to improve things like scalability, amongst others.
All right. So I'm trying to understand, actually, again, technical due diligence. Which people are usually involved? Is it one person? Is it experts with different backgrounds? And what artifacts usually this team produces after the due diligence?
Usually the due diligence involves relatively few people, although as you get more into it, there could be others involved. So again, back in the Unicheck example, on the Unicheck side, the folks that we talked to were the CTO, the head of machine learning or data science, and the CEO. Those were the only three people that we spoke with the entire few days that we were there. And then on our side, coming in to Kiev, it was myself, my boss, who was a CTO of Turnitin at the time, a product person, and then one individual from my team who works in the core search engine space, because that's because we knew that we were going to talk about that quite a bit.
Okay, like architects, I'd say.
Yeah. So I would say it's generally limited to those kinds of people, but on the tech side, if they are going to drill into some specific area, like search, then either side may want to bring in some subject matter experts.
And it's usually so company usually hire consultants actually to do due diligence if they don't have an expertise in house. Is it correct?
Sometimes, I mean, in the case, for something like Turnitin, I don't think we've ever hired consultants to do due diligence. But certainly, if you're a startup that you're looking to get due diligence for like funding purposes, like from a venture capital firm, some VCs have their own tech due diligence people on staff or on retainer, but some will outsource and bring someone third party into it. It depends.
All right, thank you. So let's move to our next topic, actually, an evaluation. I do believe that here we have a lot of startup founders or founders that would like to do exit at some point. So from your experience, what are key evaluation metrics that matters the most, probably related to technology as well?
Yeah. So yeah, the technology is certainly one aspect of it. Like, do you possess IP that is really valuable and that we could leverage as part of the acquisition? I also need to circle back to what I said earlier about the founders. I think the founders or leadership team is key, and that was certainly the case with Unicheck. We were really impressed, not just with the CTO and his command of his area, but we were also impressed with the CEO, just because, and the CEO was not even the founder. So I think you're probably also curious about whether how important it is for it to be founders. It's typically the case that you're only working with founders, but it doesn't have to be founders. But so part of the compelling thing for us is just how passionate the CEO was about what he was doing and his understanding of the space, even understanding various aspects of our technology that we didn't even realize at times.
All right. Okay. What about evaluation traps? So how can, for example, someone increase evaluation of the company that is not necessarily a true evaluation?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it's always, in the mindset of an acquiree to try to do whatever they can to improve valuation. But that doesn't necessarily mean, making blatant lies about what they're doing. I think, it's almost always the case that you're going to present the most optimistic answer that you can within reason. But I've never encountered a situation where either me representing an acquiree or me as an acquirer finding out later that they just flat out lied. That hasn't happened to me, fortunately. But I think it's a little bit of a game. It's a sales and marketing game. I would say from a tech standpoint, maybe a mistake or something that's not necessarily worth pursuing is like trying to develop something that meets all the check boxes, and so like building new features is not going to really improve your valuation at this point. It might help with certain customers, but it's not going to improve your valuation from an acquisition standpoint. I think giving your company the appearance of being successful, maybe on the sales and marketing side, is probably more valuable. So let me give you an example of that. Back when I was doing enterprise startup, so the observability product that we were building and the company I was working for, we had a pretty big competitor in the space, and they also were partnering with IBM, but they are partnering kind of in a different area. We were partnering more on the development side, and they were partnering more on the services side. And so rightly or wrongly, we were focused on, being much more feature rich than them. All the bells and whistles, really minutia detailed stuff that looked cool in demos, et cetera, et cetera. And they really ignored most of that. They were just doing very high level, more like executive level dashboards versus like detail oriented dashboards. And they were a marketing machine. They would show up at events like crazy, and really just did great outbound marketing. And we were kind of too stingy to do that. So ultimately, both companies got acquired, not by, I mean, we got acquired by IBM. They got acquired by Computer Associates. Is CA? I think CA is still around, but they got purchased for quite a bit, more than we did. And I think it wasn't so much because they had more customers. I think that it was, and they probably had a few more customers, but not enough to sort of justify their multiple exit over us. I think it was really a lot to do with perception and sales and marketing.
Interesting. All right. So I have experience of due diligence evaluation as an early stage startup. So from my experience, usually investors try to evaluate if you spend money wisely. For example, again, nobody expects that you are going to be perfect. So if, for example, if you don't have case coverage, that's probably fine. You can edit, you understand the importance of that. You just didn't spend the time on that. You try to find the product market fit. So I do believe it's really important to understand that they're going to look at your financial docs, and if there is something that doesn't make sense, probably will be call out and probably they will pass by you.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. I mean, again, since I mostly represent technology, I'm not involved with a lot of the financial areas, although, we do, as part of due diligence, we do, ask questions and look at things like their AWS spend, for example, or geez, how much does it really cost to index and process a paper? Those kinds of things, just to make sure that the unit economics look okay. But yeah, on a macro level, though, that's probably more something that the CFO and the CEO are looking at.
Right. So again, probably any advices for CTOs that, for example, I have the team that is going to evaluate my technology, and probably I'm going to rise around or do exit. What can I do here in place to help my business and for successful evaluation?
Yeah.
I can actually, yeah. Let me put it in the way.
Okay.
As a CTO, I need to prepare for evaluation. But any advices for you? What should I do right now? For example, being honest, have my paper ready, revisit my architecture diagram, something like that. Something small that can be done, for example, in a couple of weeks. But how to prepare mentally, because it's scary at some point.
Yeah. Again, as I mentioned a bit earlier, I think you should be prepared to answer anything and everything that could come your way. So, put yourself in the minds of a potential acquirer. And what would I ask a company such as myself? If you do have certain pain points in the stack, maybe think about, be honest with yourself and think about those things and how you would, address, touchy questions pertaining to them. And again, don't lie, be honest, but have, be honest with some of the shortcomings, but also have a plan of attack for dealing with the shortcomings.
All right. Thank you so much. So I'm ready to shift to the next topic in our today's agenda. It's about how to be acquired. How does it feel? So you already mentioned some stories from your previous acquisition, but let's talk about main challenges that leadership team is facing after acquisition.
Yeah, and we could talk about this from both sides, and I have experience on both sides because it's challenging for leadership on the even the acquirer side as much as it is on the acquiree's size. So from a target acquisition company acquiree standpoint, it's super challenging. In fact, as I think about my history in either being acquired or working with companies that have gotten acquired, um, I don't know if I could even think of an example where the principals and the founders stayed at uh, uh, the acquiring company more than a couple years or so. And part of it is just culture shock. I would say that most startup individuals, they just have not had a lot of experience working in larger companies, and so the pace and the processes you see in larger companies is probably overwhelming and bewildering to them, and I feel like it kind of gets in the way. I think CEOs at startups are probably even the most impacted because they're used to calling the shots, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, there are acquisitions, that occur. Maybe GitHub is a great example where you get acquired and you operate 100% independently for eternity. But by and large, the expectation is that once you get acquired, you'll probably get a grace period, like about a year, where you can still do anything you want the way you want it, and then slowly the acquiring company reins you in, and you start having to deal with migration and integration and conforming to standards and that sort of thing, and that takes a little bit of time, and that's probably around the time where co-founders will say, I don't know if I want to deal with this anymore. I'm out of here. But also, and maybe some of them would have left even earlier than a couple of years. But typically when you get acquired, both the founders and some of the key individuals will have some kind of retention bonus, at stake, and that's usually like a 2-year period, typically.
Yep, that's true. So I have a question here. So it's something that calls founder lock-in. Any advices how to make it shorter, how to avoid that? Like after an acquisition, I believe that a lot of founders or leadership team would like to probably do something else after an acquisition because it's really hard. It's hard from different perspective. Any advices from you how to avoid founder lock and just be free in less than a year? Have you faced something like that?
Are you asking like how? I don't quite understand what you mean by founder
Locking.
locking
Right.
in.
Yes. So it's mainly so again when we do due diligence, it can be before the exit, for example, for acquisition or for investment round. From my experience, it's about investment, not exit.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, if you raise an round, there is some obligations that lock you. So you need to work,
Right.
for example, for this company for X amount of
I get
time
it
and so
now.
on.
Yeah, so you're saying
So
like in the case where like maybe a founding member doesn't want to stick around, how do you
yes.
keep them around? Yeah, that's touchy and always a negotiating point. Again, back in the case of Unicheck, the CTO made it very clear that he was not going to stick around for more than about a year, and that's why we hired you afterwards. And it's one of those things where, well, can you deal with that, or can you not? Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I think founders are typically accommodating towards those kinds of lock-ins because the deal is either going to get signed if they sign up or not, and there's a lot of money at stake. So I think it's generally acceptable by founders to stay on for at least some period of time. And I think from a founder standpoint, they don't want to just necessarily like sell the thing and just let go and don't care, right? They want to ensure that whatever that they've sold continues to succeed under the new ownership. So it's a pride thing.
Okay. So you acquired the company. And right now, you're as a CTO, you're tasked to integrate that company into your bigger org, into your tech stack. You've done it a lot of times. I know. Any so any advices, any hacks how to do that? Let's imagine that I'm first time manager and right now I received a new team after the acquisition and new stack. What should I do?
Yeah, yeah. It's a tough one. As I said earlier, I think any acquired company is usually given some period of time to just assimilate their new surroundings and but continue to operate, independently. But I think, I think as an acquirer, I think you should be, very honest and upfront about the eventual, migration and what that could look like. And so to minimize surprises, but yeah, there's usually, the period of time where total independence, and then you probably go through the next period of time where you start conforming to standards. And it could be just little things like, oh, you guys are using this product for monitoring, blah, blah, blah. Now you need to leverage our license and use this. And then, maybe over time, then you do other migrations, and then you start talking about moving customers over and systems over, integrating with brand and all that. But I would certainly try to be as honest about if your intention really is to, migrate their stuff fully into the new environment, and be branded accordingly, et cetera, I don't think you should dance around it. I think it's better to be honest about that rather than, maybe slightly deceitful.
Right. So I do have a question from audience actually, and it's pretty interesting. How do you get employees to stay around? Except bonus, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess the question is probably more specific around, acquired companies and getting them to stay around. That's a tough one. I always tell, especially engineers in their earlier part of their career, most folks that are in that category, they have not worked or have very little desire to work in a larger company. Because they just hear all the myths and story. I mean, some of them could be true about, the problems working in larger companies. But I actually think it's a good benefit for them. So say you're just a software engineer and you get acquired by a larger company, and then you get frustrated because of all the process and bureaucracy, whatever. I actually advise people like that to stick with it for a while, because it's always good to understand how larger companies operate. And, there's a good chance maybe in 10 years or whatever, you're going to be on the other, you're going to, go through a similar process on either side, and just kind of understanding how large companies work is going to be a benefit to you. Yeah, it's not it's a tough question, and there's no easy answer. I think in some cases, especially in tinier startups, going to a large company might open up opportunities too. So an example is one of the startups that I was at. We had just one and only UX person, and that person was really grateful to get acquired, because that just opened up all these other opportunities to grow her career in ways that could have never occurred, at a startup, in terms of responsibilities and exposure, et cetera. So it varies.
Mm-hmm. So I have one additional question from so not X, but current Turnitin employee. I'm sorry, not X for sure. So is it harder for American companies to acquire European companies with all unknown factors around GDPR and data privacy framework?
I can be. I mean, at Turnitin, we, since we operated globally even before a lot of the acquisitions, because we always had a presence in the UK, our understanding of things like GDPR, were pretty good and pretty well known. I think, speaking personally, the bigger challenge is just around the geographical diversity in general of everyone. So, we had people, we were based in the US, but we had a big UK location. We had Kiev, we had Sweden, we had Amsterdam, so lots of different time zones and different cultures and different ways of operating within cultures. Like for example, it was never a problem for those of you in the Ukraine. You guys work crazy hours, and you guys accept the fact that that's going to be the case working with U.S. companies. But there are other countries in Europe, for example, that are pretty a little more strict around the hours that they work, and so there's a certain cutoff time, and it may prove challenging for the U.S. because by the time you wake up in the morning and try to reach someone there, they've sort of kind of past their time. So things like that, the way people communicate is a little different. I know you and I have had discussions about cultural differences in communication and how certain cultures are a little bit more relaxed and laid back and quiet and tend not to speak up in public a lot. And when they're giving presentations, speak a little bit more slowly and thoughtfully. Whereas, maybe in some Western areas like the US, like people like just boom, 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 and they talk really fast. And that's sort of a sign of being smart.
Right. That's true. Cultural challenge is a huge challenge, actually, in the acquisition, in addition to everything else. All right. So the next question from our audience is, what is the main tips from you on how to become a successful tech leader, CDO, or VP, and so on?
Yeah. I think a number of things. I think I mentioned earlier about being early in my career and realizing that you can't be the subject matter expert as you progress from engineer to, engineering leader, for example. So I think, placing trust in your employees, I think is key. And also diversity of your employees is key. So I think it's couple things I've come across, in my travels. One is this sort of natural tendency to hire in your own image. I want people to think I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. I'm going to hire people just like me, and we'll just sync up on everything, and off we go. I think that's kind of a mistake. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that it's probably more a better thing to just hire folks that have, in some cases, different approach, a difference of opinion to challenge you, because they may think of things that you've never thought of, and vice versa. So that's one thing. The other thing I've seen a lot is sort of, thinking that the team that you've worked with before. So the natural tendency is you go to a new company and you're going to hire all these people. And then you ended up hiring all your friends and people that you had success with in the past. Very common. I've done that a lot too. But you need to realize that the people that you had joint success with in the past aren't necessarily going to be the people that you'll need to have success in your future endeavor. Maybe the what the company does is different, or maybe the market timing is different. Maturities, there's just a lot of factors. So you can't assume that, hey, these three people and we just made success in the previous company, we're going to do the exact same thing at the next company. So be careful about that, and try to think outside the box a little bit when you do your hiring, rather than just doing what feels naturally comfortable to you.
Okay, awesome. So I know that, again, we used to work together at Turnitin, and right now you're not a part of Turnitin anymore. So what do you do right now?
What am I doing? That's and the answer to that has changed very recently. So I left Turnitin towards the end of last year, and then I just took a well-needed break, just to chill out for a while, because I haven't had downtime in a while. I seriously thought about retiring, even because I'm close to that point of I'm old, put it that way.
Come on.
And so I rather enjoyed the downtime, but really at a certain point, you could only watch so much Netflix.
I'm with you.
Trust me, I've watched all the shows.
All right.
Start feeling like, oh, I should probably do something else, and get more mentally engaged. And so I did a little bit of earlier in the year. I started interviewing a little bit. I didn't really reach out to recruiters, but recruiters are always reaching out to me, so I entertained some of them. But to be perfectly honest, I've done sort of more traditional corporate kinds of things for so long that I just didn't feel that motivated to doing it again. And so I started looking at other potential options for doing something interesting career-wise. And I happened to stumble across someone that I consulted with who turned me on to doing working with franchises. And so, to make a long story short, I recently just signed up with a company and I purchased a couple of franchises in the local area to do IT support for small and medium businesses, and it's called CMIT. And I can show you just a tiny
Yeah, sure. Please show it to us.
you.
And congrats, actually. All right.
Oh, thank you.
Interesting.
Let's see. Can you see that?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do.
So yeah, I now work with an outfit called CMIT Solutions, and as I mentioned, they are a IT services company focused on small and medium businesses in the US. So I know that the audience here is probably largely European, so there's no applicability. But if you know people in the US that have small and by small and medium business, it's usually like the 10 to 200 person type company. If you think about it, companies of that size, they need IT support just like anyone else, but they don't necessarily have the budget to support someone full-time on site. And so that's where a company like ours comes in to provide that kind of managed service. So you could look at all the metrics here. Yeah, we have offices all over. At 240 is low. I think we're around 270 now. And again, since most of you are European based, I happen to live right around here in California. And so I have a couple of territories there. And then in terms of kind of the services that we offer, it's all your sort of standard infrastructure-ish services for IT. Security is a huge concern for everyone now. So privacy, et cetera. So we do backups and we do pen testing and all the normal, firewalls, network support, et cetera, for small and medium businesses. So quite a portfolio of things. But like I said, I'm just getting started. I actually just signed up less than a month ago, and I still need to get trained on everything, which is going to happen later this month. So that's what I decided to do. It's a little bit, it's technology still, which is good. But it's a role that I haven't played before as a small business owner. So, I've done startups. I've done venture capital startups, and I've been a co-founder in venture capital startups. But even then, you're still dealing with your co-founders and the board and other investors, et cetera. Never felt like it was totally your own top to bottom. And so this is my foray into kind of being my own boss, I guess. And in this position, I have to be kind of the chief revenue officer, salesperson as well, which is totally out of my element, but I view it as a challenge.
Awesome.
So that's what I'm doing in a nutshell going forward.
Right.
As well as doing general consulting. I do just bits of advisory consulting from time to time, often in doing due diligence for companies, stuff like that.
Okay. Then you're expert of this matter. So I do believe that it's this company doesn't have any relationship to due diligence, only to services around IT. Is it correct?
Yeah, although I guess potentially as I work with some of these small businesses and they're thinking strategically about what they want to do going forward, there could be a technology advisory angle to that I can capitalize on as well.
Awesome. So I'm so happy that you right now watch a lot of Netflix and decided what you would like to do next.
and I'm an expert in K-dramas, by the way. Now,
what is your favorite one now?
Oh, I don't know about favorite, but I just watched this one called Mask Girl. It's pretty interesting.
No, didn't hear even about that, but I'm not actually. I don't watch too much Netflix, to be honest.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much. I'm really it was so great to talk to you about the area of your expertise. I didn't know that before. I know that you were so experienced and so interesting person to talk to. Thank you for spending time with me and the audience. So our next online meetup will take place on October 10th. And the next offline meetup will be held on September 26th at Unicity in Kyiv. So please follow our announcement on our official pages of Dev Challenge at Unicity. And have a great evening and day.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. And hello to some of my Turnitin colleagues who evidently are watching this.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.